Science is really critical. I mean, Neil deGrasse Tyson and Bill Nye, the science guy, they hate astrology.
I've listened.
They hate it. As a historian, I'm kind of like, look, you don't have to hate, right? You can try to understand because whether you like it or not, it's a very powerful phenomenon.
It has meaning.
Welcome to Pop Syllabus. I'm your host, Christiana Mbakwe Medina. Rising signs, natal charts, Mercury's in retrograde. Again, it feels like all of a sudden everyone's into astrology. And there's a reason for that. We're in the middle of what's being described as the big Zodiac era, with astrology-related products on pace to become a massive $22 billion industry. To help us make sense of all of this, I'm joined by Margaret Gaida, a professor of astrology, astronomy, and magic.
Thank you for coming to Pop Syllabus.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Even though you're an expert in astrology, you're not a practitioner, right? You're not here to do my reading.
No.
so for people at home, there's going to be no birth chart. I'm sorry about that. Just to give people at home that know nothing about this, right? Eastern versus Western astrology. Can you explain to me, what they are and how they've evolved? Kind of give us astrology for dummies.
Okay, so Western astrology has a long history, starting with the Greeks and then going into the Islamic world and then the Latin West. And around the medieval period, they all agreed to accept a division of the zodiac along the signs. And the signs are just the 30-degree divisions of the sky. And that became the sort of Western tropical zodiac. Okay. However, in the East, they adopted a different set of not signs, but divisions of the sky, which is more based on the position of the constellations rather than the sort of 30-degree divisions of the sky in the Western astrology. So it's just a difference in division of signs, but a lot of the ideas about influences or sort of what planetary, if they're positive or negative, or what the signs are, what the houses are, those are actually all quite similar in East and West.
There is some area of overlap, because my follow-up was that, and we'll get into this more later, is that like the Eastern seems a bit more like community driven, and like the popular version of astrology that I'm seeing right now, especially in the West, let's say UK and America, broadly speaking, is more individual. It's like, who do I date and what's going to happen to me and what's the psychic reading saying, Is that a crude generalization? And can you tell me more about that?
I mean, I don't think it's crude. I think it is just reflective of the cultures in which the science is practiced. Yeah. And I say science, right, with loose, right, loosely. Astrology was a science for a long time and was taught at universities. And so any sort of scientific practice is going to be informed by the culture in which it's practiced. And so I think that that's true to some extent. However, in the West, astrological practice was much broader than horoscopes. It was predictive for a long time and was related to weather patterns and natural disasters like earthquakes and plagues and that sort of thing.
So was it able to predict them, or would it say like a plague is coming and the plague may not or may not come?
So this is a great question and really fun for historians of astrology, because it's full of instances of successful predictions, which is why people have believed in it for such a long time, and then also false predictions. Okay. So one of the famous ones is 1524. A huge sort of biblical flood type event was predicted because of a watery sign triplicity happening, and there were pamphlets published about it. There was this sort of mass hysteria. And then, there was no flood, right? Of course, And so that's a pretty famous instance of a false one. One of my other examples that I love to tell was of a character named Valentine Naibod. He was living in the 16th century and was an astrologer and was working on his own horoscope, and he calculated the date of his death, which was a common practice as well during this time period.
I don't want to know. I don't want to know.
A lot of modern,
go out in a very chic way, but I don't want to know the actual date,
A lot of modern people do. But at the time when life expectancy is shorter, the idea is that knowing in advance, maybe you can have some sort of avoidance.
So would
he did. Yeah.
Was it to know in advance to like pray against it? Because that's why my mum would want to know.
Yeah, exactly. So you want to have a sense because astrologers would say astrology is not an exact science. Yeah. And so there's room for error. And so in this case, Valentin Naibad predicted or found the date of his death. And so to avoid it, he went to his country home and he shut himself up. He closed all of the shutters and was like, I'll just sit here, hunker down for several days until the time passes. And so while he was there, a band of passing robbers saw the house, saw that it was all shut up, and thought no one was home. And then they found him inside and they stabbed him to death. So he's
like really, really good at manifesting the worst possible thing.
Exactly.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. It's interesting thing about astrology. It does have this rich history of like the confirmation bias of like, it has worked.
Yes. You know? Yes. Okay. So it has worked. And that confirmation bias for many people is real and it's a lived experience even in contemporary practice. Okay. And so many people, if you talk with the astrological community, they'll give specific examples, not just of something about their personality that resonates with them, but sometimes even like, I was sick because of this planet moving into my 6th house or something like that. Or I was really having trouble getting pregnant and then I got pregnant. You know, they have their own examples.
The stories you kind of tell yourself about this practice.
Yes.
On the success stories, I'm curious, can you give an example of like a contemporary modern example of like astrology predicting something?
Of course. I have a good friend, right, who is really interested in astrology. And even for myself in the summertime, I was like, oh man, it's summer. It's going to be a little bit tight. Yeah. And then they were like, well, don't worry. Looks like Jupiter's going into your 8th house. Has anybody died recently? Are you going to get some money? And then lo and behold, that very day, my mom called and was like, oh, we were going through your uncle's affairs. He passed away 2 years ago. And there's an account that we found.
Okay. See, like, okay. My family would say that person is a witch. now you're pulling me the other way.
You know, these things happen. So that's again why people, it's part of why it's so popular still, is that there are enough of these things that happen that drives the sort of belief, the practice, and the understanding, and that sort of greater connection to cosmic forces.
So I grew up in England, and you know the English have a very interesting relationship with astrology.
I can imagine.
You know? And growing up, there was a astrologer. Our biggest astrologer was a woman called Mystic Meg, and she used to do the lottery numbers. And well, she didn't predict the numbers. She'd just do a little kind of reading before the lottery, and she had a column in the Sun, right? So this was. Everyone knew about Mystic Meg. But as I was kind of doing my reading for today and speaking to our producers, Justine and Audrey, and it was like, the people that kept coming up were like men. It was like Alan Leo, who invented, I think it was the sun sign. And he's often referred to as the father of astrology. Your dissertation was on a guy called Al-Kabisi, am I saying it?
Al-Kabisi, yes,
yeah. And he's considered one of the forefathers of Arab and Muslim mythology. And because of this Mystic Meg and because of like this very West African background of like the witches in the village, I'm curious about like the mothers of astrology, because it feels like historically it's been a male field, but like in my imagination and in my personal life, when I look at the faces of astrology, it's kind of like whether it's the columnist or it's influencers or it's the friend I call and I'm like, what's going on? It seems to be women. So like, who are like the mothers of astrology who have like guided this?
One of the women that I've worked on is most famous for actually being one of Louis XIV's mistresses.
I love a side chick. I think they're critical for plot. I love a side chick. Tell me more.
And so she's writing in late 17th century. Marie Mancini is her name. And she was actually doing astrological predictions with the full kind of not just horoscopic astrology, but really sort of developed like weather predictions and a yearly prediction for a city and that sort of thing. And so I've also had this question. So she's the earliest person that I can think of in early modern Europe, but also, of course, there's Hypatia, who is writing much, much earlier, right? She's ancient. Greek. But in terms of more recent times, there are lots of women who are practicing. So I'm kind of like in contemporary names. Yeah. There aren't a lot. Like, I mean, Chani and then, and Susan Miller. Yeah. So there are lots of contemporary women. But I feel like in this sort of 20th century, there are earlier in the century, there are sort of lots of women doing it, but not as well known as the men.
Absolutely. I think that's the thing I was coming back to, because I was like, it'd be like, then this man discovered this and this man said this. And I was like, but where are the women? Because I don't know, not to get too woo-woo, but like the menstrual cycle, guided by the moon. It's like, I feel like women always have like this relationship with nature. And there's always like the wise woman in the family who is speaking about, whether it's the planets, but kind of woo-woo spiritual stuff. But when I looked at like a lot of the research and people who were basically like, they were like the paternal figures in this field, it was all men. And I was curious about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, part of it too is who's publishing, right?
Yeah.
And so
even back then it was a problem.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even in modern times, I mean, you are a parent, right?
Yeah.
And even for myself, it's sort of like, part of the reason all my books aren't published yet is because I've been raising children.
Margaret has 3 kids, by the way. She's in the trenches. She's got 3 kids.
Yes. So, I mean, part of it is just whatever the constraints that women are having with being raising children or being in families. And then also it's sort of, just traditions of male domination in different fields. There's also just the marginalization of astrology within academia as a practice, because that's happening since the sort of end of the scientific revolution. And so astrology was still being sort of widely practiced, but in different circles. And so I think this sort of history of gender within those circles is really interesting. But again, that's all Western. And so I think one thing that's really interesting that you brought up earlier is this question of the Eastern astrology. And when I was thinking about gender in the East, men are still really involved as consumers of astrology in the East. And so you can go and find any YouTube video about the latest predictions for a cricket match in India by men, right? So they're all there. Yeah. Whereas in the West or in the US or especially UK, I was seeing that there's this sort of real problem with especially straight men criticizing their girlfriends or women who are so interested in astrology.
Yeah. And, that's something I wanted to get into, because like I would say for like, there's certain communities, and the data does kind of bear that out, that are like more inclined to practicing and believing in astrology. I mean, I would say like my lesbian friends, they treat it like the Bible. They don't play about charts, but then like straight white men and who skew sometimes conservative seem to be a lot more skeptical of it. Why do you think that is, especially in a Western framework? It's just like, this is something that we say women and queer people do, and everyone else is like, we're not into that.
Yeah. So I think part of it is conditioning for sure, because you can see in the East that men are just as interested in astrology as women, but because they've been raised that way, that astrology is sort of part of the culture. Whereas here, astrology being part of the New Age and sort of marginalized itself has been less mainstream until relatively recently. And so I think that there's also just this sort of gender bias generally in society. And I was trying to think back, it was only like 25 years ago, around when Larry Summers, the president of Harvard, made that comment about gender bias in education between men and women. And so I think there are certain sort of really deep biases in Western culture along masculine and feminine that lead to these sort of differences in consumption. In terms of the LGBTQ community, that's a question too, where a lot of mainstream religions don't necessarily have space for members of LGBTQ community. And so for them, to find a space where they're welcome, where they can find meaning, where they can connect to some kind of deeper and more meaningful questions in their own lives and find answers to them, and also find community. I think that's another part of it as well. Astrology offers that. And again, I mentioned this before, but it really is this connection to the greater cosmos that I feel like our whole Western society and its trend towards secularism has been missing. So there's already sort of this absence outside of most faith communities. And so people are sort of turning towards that. And I mean, I think women have found it, and members of LGBTQ communities have found it. I think men actually are still really struggling, straight men, because they're missing a lot of deeper connection, and they don't necessarily have the outlet or the space.
You get red pilled, or you get super into working out, or like, you know, it's all inward, right? But not like a spiritual, contemplative way of thinking about yourself in the rest of the world. And so I think that's why you start to see a few more like men's groups showing up, where they're kind of starting to explore some of those issues. But that's what I would say is kind of what's going on. I think that like a lot of women, especially when you kind of get into your like late 20s into your 30s, you have some sort of health crisis. Maybe it's like, for me, I had challenges with fertility. I've had women in my life have autoimmune issues. I've had women sadly pass away from cancer. Like, it's just, you know, your bodies start to fail you in the way that bodies fail. And I think there's something to astrology when the medical establishment doesn't like hear you, right? And there's a strand of women who are just like, okay, I'm going to get into wellness. I'm going to get, you know, like it's the Maha RFK of it all, which I think sometimes we can diminish people's real anxieties about like, what am I putting in my body? And I don't feel heard when I see my GP. And then I think for that churning, that worry about what's happening to your body, I think that astrology offers a certain type of relief for a certain type of woman who perhaps maybe doesn't want to go to a church or a mosque or a temple or a synagogue. Like, institutionalized religion comes with its own kind of like heaviness that you're just like, I don't want to touch that. However, I think there's something out there. You know what I mean? So it's just like, okay, like I'm reading Vulture or reading The Cut, and there's my astrology. You know, I think that there is an easy entryway to dealing with some of the like vicissitudes of life and the troubles that you get into like your early 30s. Yeah,
I think that's a great observation. And it really resonates with the sense that the Western sort of culture is so much more mind oriented than embodied. And that's true for women too. And so, I mean, I remember growing up learning about my own cycle. I didn't read it until I didn't know really the details until I was trying to get pregnant.
Oh yeah, the luteal phase. I was like, what?
I know.
I was like, what?
I know. And I was like, how am I just learning about this in my late 20s when this has been happening in my body since I was 13? Exactly. So I think that there's a real disconnect.
You feel angry. Someone, you're like, what? Why did my mother didn't tell me? My grandmother didn't tell me. I didn't learn this in biology class. Like there is like a rage. There, you know?
And so there's this whole kind of sense that we should be really connected with our bodies and really embodied, and yet we're not.
Completely disembodied.
And then that's mirrored when we start to have issues or problems, and we go to get it checked out in a traditional medical establishment, and we're not heard, or we're not, or we're seen as complaining, or our symptoms aren't taken seriously, or any of those things. And so I think that there's a real, definitely a disconnect between this broader culture, again, which is very mind oriented, and the embodied experiences of women.
I'm actually, you know, we've kind of spoken about like the gender and sexuality differences in astrology, but I'm actually curious about the fact that it's US adults without college degrees who are more likely than college graduates to believe in it. I'm really curious about the socioeconomics of it all. And I say that because like I grew up in a very churchy background. My dad's a pastor. And specifically, even in the Black church, people pray about money a lot, right? Like, God, I need this, I need that. But it also creates this like big sense of like faith. And I'm just curious about like astrology and socioeconomics in like an American sense, but about the degrees. What is it about attaining a degree that means you're like, I'm going to turn away from, you know, this more woo-woo thing?
So this is really interesting to me because it's a little bit against my own experience.
Okay, so tell me more.
And yeah, so I came from, currently I'm at Occidental, but I did a postdoc at Caltech, which is supposed to be, right, this sort of bastion for STEM, education. And the course I taught was The Occult Origins of Modern Science, Alchemy, Astrology, and Magic. We talked about astrology quite a bit, and students were really interested in not just talking about it, but in actually having a space where they felt safe talking about it. When you have a degree, there's an expectation that you're going to sort of conform to intellectual commitments.
Secular. It's
right?
Like the academy.
It's not just secular. It's that science is really critical. I mean, Neil deGrasse Tyson and Bill Nye the Science Guy, they hate astrology.
I've listened. They
hate it. And so it's something too where as a historian, I'm kind of like, look, you don't have to hate, right? You can try to understand because whether you like it or not, it's a very powerful phenomenon.
It has meaning.
That's been around for thousands of years. And so even just that as a phenomenon, I think makes it worth it. And I think the more people sort of resist and close doors or just sort of are judgmental and even sort of carrying shame with it or just saying like, how could you believe that? That's nonsense. For something which for a lot of people provides a lot of meaning, comfort, and making sense in a very difficult time. I think that's problematic for our culture.
It's interesting. So like there are maybe people who are like astrologically curious.
For sure.
But maybe they're not willing to express that because the climate we're in now, we said, well, that's a thing associated with women and queer people. And we know because of like homophobia and misogyny, like even the conceit of this show, like we talk about pop culture a lot. And that's because the thing that there's like women and queer people are into and people don't take it seriously. They're like, that's not worthy of our rigor. But maybe there is more of a yearning in people that we wouldn't expect, but because of who it's associated with and because of what it is, people are like, I'm not into that.
Yeah. And I think what's especially problematic about that resistance is that there's an assumption that just like, astrology is false and science has proved it wrong. And there actually has never been like a critical and rigorous test. There have been different studies where certain horoscope practices have been shown to be problematic. So for example, they'll give a whole group of people their horoscope and they'll say, does this resonate with you? And, an overwhelming percentage will say yes. And then they'll say, actually, that's the horoscope of the person sitting next to you.
So, it's like
there's that sort of thing.
That's weird.
There's that. But then even around the time, sort of post-scientific revolution, when astrology was starting to be marginalized, it wasn't because people were making false predictions or because they were doing tests and saying, actually, this isn't true. It was a much more complicated sort of social and intellectual phenomenon that historians are still trying to understand. In the meantime, you also have this astrological history, which is a discipline practice for many centuries, where astrologers would look at historical events and then find planetary configurations that sort of align with whatever historical events that they are. And that's where some contemporary astrologers are sort of trying to kind of find a voice to say, look, these are legitimate correlations that members of the scientific community are not taking seriously. So in terms of testing it, right? A lot of times for me personally, I'll just say, some kind of crucial test is not interesting for me because it's already such a incredible phenomenon in terms of
it's real.
People. It's real.
It's real
exactly.
to the people who believe it's real. And that's what's interesting.
Exactly.
For you, right?
And so I'm not really, advocating for any sort of test, but at the same time, I feel like we need to acknowledge that there haven't actually been that many tests.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I'm curious about the big Zodiac piece of it all, right? Because whether you believe in astrology or not, that both sides kind of agree that they don't like this huge volume of venture capital going into making these apps and these websites and with the AI of it all. On the one hand, you kind of have your purists who believe like these apps are corrupting a sacred spiritual practice, right? You should never pay for access to spiritual gifts. To me, it's the equivalent of like a mega church pastor who's like, give me your money. There's something gross about that, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a purist on one side. And then on the other hand, you've got skeptics who are like, well, I think that's exploitative. Like, because I don't believe this is real in the first place. So why are VCs suddenly getting lots of money to make these astrology apps? And I'm curious about like this wave of venture capital that's coming into astrology and creating like we're in this age of like big Zodiac, basically.
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, this is all just created by just the incredible way that we can now handle data. I mean, and that was astrology's one of its biggest sort of problems in the past, was that it was just usually one human dealing with sets and sets of tables and calculations and just doing all of that. And so there's a lot of room for error. And so now that we can handle big data, there's a lot more possibility. And so I think and people can see that possibility. Okay. I think the problem comes in when you can also see the possibility for exploitation. And it's not just with astrology apps, it's also just with AI more generally. Yeah. And so with any technology, there are going to be people who will be trying to make money off of it and then trying to make money off of people using the technology. Yeah. And so for people who are going to be using whatever the technology is, to be aware of what they're consuming, where it comes from, and just to be informed about those things. Because for the purists, sadly, right? I mean, are the purists using a computer program to compute the chart, or are they actually going back and like observing with an astrolabe the planetary position and like writing down? So
like, who is a purist at this point, right? Yeah, I get it.
So we all are going to use tools from time to time, but thinking deeply about how we're using those tools, what purposes they're serving. And then again, yes, there will be apps where you have to pay in, but for all of the apps that are coming out that are asking for a subscription, there's so much knowledge available online for free for how to do things, how to make interpretations, that anyone who's really interested, who doesn't want to use a paid subscription, should be able to find out for themselves. It's going to take a little bit of work, but they should be able to find it.
I want to pick you up on that a bit later, and especially like the online social media of it all. But I think it was CoStar was accused of kind of tracking users' app usage outside of the actual app and using that to perhaps manipulate their readings, etc. So there's like kind of like a tech ethic component to the investment in these apps and their explosion, etc.
Yeah, that's absolutely going to be the case. And that's going to be, again, for anything, whether it's any app. And then I think there's astrology apps, but before long, we're starting to see sort of even more health related apps and medical apps, and then telehealth and all of that sort of thing. And so there's a lot of warnings against, sharing your data and being aware of where your data is going and all of that sort of thing. And so again, I think it's on the users to be aware of that. But then of course also tech companies, we've been trying to regulate them now for years, and it's kind of like there's still transgressions. And so I just think that's going to be more and more difficult. Even the sort of more automated things become, because eventually AI is going to be running a lot of the processes that humans are now running.
And we're already kind of seeing that, like the influencer. Can you tell me a bit about like the AI influence on these astrology apps that are emerging?
I mean, AI in a lot of cases is maybe even going to take the place of some of the astrology apps, some AIs, or the apps are going to be using an integrated AI function. So some of the AIs currently are not very good at astrology, right?
I don't think AI is very good at anything. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I like it. It's always a bit hackneyed and hallucinate. So I'm not shocked that it's like.
Yeah. So, but that's very, very rapidly changing. Okay. And so I think that, I think astrology apps will begin to, they'll start using integrated AI.
Machine kind of learning. Oh my God.
Yeah. So again, for the purists, right, that's going to be problematic. And so I think that that's another case where people now who are really drawn to ChatGPT for things like therapy, right, that's again the concern where those apps are with an integrated astrology program, that is really, I think, just, we want to use it, but use it responsibly, right? Or just kind of be really conscious of the use, because people will use it, and they're already doing it. And so I would say, just as a user, just be aware of what it is you're doing.
Yeah. That kind of brings me to two sides of this. So we've got like this mass kind of proliferation of these apps and this investment, and the investor of this app looks a certain way, and the person who profits from the explosion of these apps looks a certain way. And then we also have the piece of, think about a group chat I'm in with 3 of my closest friends from high school. One of the ladies in the group, one of my close friends, her name is Shrina, and she's of Indian descent. And because of her cultural heritage, you know, she's our go-to person, all things astrology. And she's the one that tells us when Mercury's in retrograde and what stones. She's the person. And she's actually the person that tells me my favorite quote, that she says, the stars are intertwined with your prayers. So she's just like, you know, the stars are not destiny. They're just there as a map, and you should pray. So she's very, very, she hates people calling it woo-woo. She's like, this is my culture. Yeah. This is what I know. However, when you look at kind of like astrology influencers online, people with big followings, the big columnists at some of the big magazines, you look at the venture capitalist investors, you look who's making the money, the face isn't necessarily brown like Shrina's. The face is, the person investing tends to be white and male, and the face of it on YouTube or TikToks tends to be a very young, attractive white woman. How did we kind of get to this space, even specifically in the West? And when we say the West, these are global stars, right? Some of these influencers are known all about across the world. How did we get to this space where it's like the tradition isn't even associated with this broad part of the East, and people who still practice it till this day and take it very seriously?
I mean, the West continues to marginalize in all sorts of ways, even with this sort of popular movement of astrology. It's going to be driven by wealth eventually, right? And who are the main wealthy people in this country? It's mostly white people. I mean, that's part of it. For young white women, again, who have not had, who are not necessarily tied to a faith tradition, and who are presented with astrology as a alternative, and then quickly sort of found meaning in that. There's a real kind of attachment and then drive that's behind that. And so I think that's where you get the sort of younger influencer base, is that it's not necessarily coming from a place of greed.
No, it doesn't seem malicious. There's like an actual real innocent zeal. I've watched some of these videos and I'm like, oh, there's true believers. Yeah. And they want to help people and they're attractive, so people click follow.
Exactly. You know I mean, that's what it is. It's like they found, so as an influencer, they found something that works for them. And I think what feels good is that it does feel really meaningful.
Yeah. And connected.
And so that's a space where, I think that they should certainly be cognizant of their role, of sort of, you know, how they're participating and what the participation looks like. And then that's a case too where, would we like to see more acknowledgement of Eastern influence? Absolutely. Of just more saying, more diversity, or just saying like, okay, you're an influencer. Where are your ideas coming from? What, like, engage with the history, engage with the sort of contemporary cultural practices in other societies, right? So I think, again, with any science or practice, there is a history, and so bringing that into what you're doing is really important.
I think some of that happens because they found this practice as an individual, as a silo. It wasn't like passed on to them by a like grandmother or a great grandmother. You know, they came across it maybe on the internet. Yeah, there isn't. When something doesn't have necessarily a lineage from you, you don't think about like, oh, like I have to honor the ancestors or think about other people that are myself. You're just like, oh, I've become an authority on this thing and I have an audience. Whereas people maybe from Eastern cultures are like, well, I had to get a reading to get married. I had to get a reading before we tried to conceive. Like my friends tell me like such interesting thing is like this real communal thing, right? Whereas I think that Western individualism means you kind of just get these influencers in silos who are building mini empires. It's not malicious. They're true believers, but they're not thinking about like the cultural lineage and the heritage of this practice they're engaged in.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. And I think too, this idea of the lineage is so important. And then also with astrology, in most other fields, there's like a disciplinary kind of expectation or practice, or you have to get a degree or an exam.
There's the book.
Or there's a book, or you have to, exactly. And this is a field where, yes, there actually was a university in the United States, I think Kepler University, that had a program in astrology. And there's some kind of disciplinary, like there are conferences for practicing astrologers, but these women are not part of that community either, right? That's what I think is so fascinating.
Kind of
and so you get like the astrology podcast that Chris Brennan does is just excellent. Just deals really deeply with the whole history of astrology, but then also kind of, does yearly forecast or monthly forecast and that sort of thing. But, he's deeply tied in with the people going to the conferences and presenting papers and, talking to each other and publishing in the journal, right? So a lot of kind of academic disciplinary practices that keep each other accountable.
Accountable. I love that word. Accountable.
There's an accountability there. Whereas with the young influencers who are just sort of individuals, the accountability is their number of likes and subscribers and is the audience. And so I think too with sort of listeners for the show, as we're consuming information, being aware of where our information is coming from, how it's being compiled, all of that stuff too is important. And for somebody who doesn't know anything about astrology at all, someone saying complete nonsense can say it and sound very intelligent because you don't know.
Yeah, you don't know. Yeah.
You just don't know. And
also
so
you're vulnerable, because I think to seek anything, like whether it's astrology, whether it's like a new type of Pilates, like to grasp at something for meaning and to make you feel good, it's often because stuff isn't going that well. It's just, there's kind of like this flux, right?
Yeah.
And I think then you are even more vulnerable to just, I don't even want to say misinformation, for not being able to discern whether, is this good information? Is this bad information? And trust me, my husband always says I'm very susceptible to cults. I've been down so many different weird parts of the internet and the world, like in that search for meaning, or I just get really hyper fixated and into things. And I just think it's just like, how they're, on social media now, we see a lot of people doing like what I eat in the day. And you're like, oh, I want to follow this person. I like their body. This is what they're eating in the day. And then you're like, oh, but this is an eating disorder pipeline, right? I think there is an element of astrology where it's just like, my life is crazy. I graduated during COVID. I didn't get to go to my high school graduation or my college graduation. Like, I can't make sense of life. And then you follow this influencer, but maybe they're not even that good at what they do. Yeah,
or whatever it is designed to then get you listening regularly, right? And
coming back.
Yeah, and again, it's with good intentions, but it is something where instead of kind of looking or dealing with the deeper issues or sort of a root cause, these women might be kind of like placating their symptoms or just sort of like managing them through that sort of surface level understanding, or just like, oh, it's okay that this happened. Mercury's in retrograde, right? Or like whatever, or okay, this, any example. And so I think the first step is to just acknowledge that you as an individual are like searching for something more and just say, oh, there's something missing here. I'm not okay.
Oh, wow.
Before then like just turning to the next thing and just like really sitting with yourself and thinking, okay, I'm not okay. What is that?
Yeah.
What is this about exactly? And just kind of sitting with the self-inquiry before like jumping in. Yeah.
I feel like you're giving me therapy right now. Because, I was thinking when I was like reading the stuff our producers pulled together for this episode, I was like, oh my God, this is so deep. Like astrology is some complex, heavy, layered, multifaceted. I'm like, I couldn't, and it was not that I couldn't get my head around it. I was just like, it was like an onion within an onion within an onion. And I'm like, even if somebody is to earnestly try and study this or be an earnest practitioner of it, it is very complicated.
It is really complicated. And historically, it was really complicated. And historically, there were always charlatans, right? Who were called out by their peers as not being good astrologers. And what's interesting is that for hundreds of years, a good astrologer actually had to be able to do all of the technical calculations themselves.
So be good at physics,
yes,
like you.
to be good at math, really,
math. Yeah.
And to be good at math and to be able to really understand the astronomical part of the science. And then they would overlay the sort of interpretation and the judgments. And so, again, there's no sort of way to discern, right, who the experts are and who are not. Just from a person's standpoint who doesn't know anything about the subject. Astrologers also will disagree, right? And so that's something too, where you think, oh, there's Western and there's Vedic. And then even within Western, there's traditional and there's the psychological, the 20th century. And, which house system are you using? And, they're all of these different sort of ways that humans have gone about constructing meaning using these systems in different ways. And so if you read like the astrology subreddit, it's like really,
I've been on there.
It's a very rich discourse, place of discourse.
They be going at it.
Yeah. They also will argue.
Messy. I love a bit of mess.
Yeah.
So I was like in the comments, I was like, they don't get on.
Yeah. But that's a thing too, where some people really have a conviction about their own system and why their system works or is superior.
You know what? I love that. Can I pick up from there?
Go ahead.
Astrology has become a big part of dating culture. Right?
Oh yeah.
Shapes who people are willing to date. I think how people hire. A 2020 MIT study showed that there was extensive discrimination in China against Virgos, which is crazy to me because Beyonce is a Virgo, and you want more Beyonces. Okay,
you do, yeah.
So I don't like that. And I recently saw a phrase where people talked about, there's people that don't like date Geminis, and they called astrology space racism. Because it's just like, what? How did we get here, guys? But I think what the space racism phrase was getting at. It's like this kind of dogmatic and prejudicial ways that we can wield this knowledge. And I don't think that's unique to astrology. I think that anyone that's coming to some sort of learning, whether it's like political ideology, whether it's spiritual, whether it's diet. I mean, I have friends that won't touch gluten and like, it's, like when you become a believer in a thing, it can shape how you treat others. But I'd love to get your perspective on like the very dogmatic ways that we're seeing millennials and Gen Z use astrology to shape who they are, even in who they date, who they're in community with, and even their own choices and behavior. To
me, I think is really problematic because a lot of this, like, I don't date Geminis, that puts somebody into a box just based on their sun sign. And I'm kind of like, that's like, from an astrological perspective, for, again, hundreds of years, someone's sun sign doesn't dictate their entire being. Astrology is so much more complex than that. And so I think in some ways that's actually being a little dismissive of astrology. It's like reductive. Using it, it's reducing it. And humans are such complex and wonderful beings. And so I think, using it as a tool for sort of mutual understanding, is helpful. But then using it as a filter,
it's like a cudgel as
for who you're comfortable interacting with is just like using other qualities of a person, right? Why, if you're space racism, why discriminate against someone's sun sign and instead of, something else about them, some other feeture about them.
That they actually can't help. Because I can't help when I was born.
Yeah.
I couldn't help it.
Exactly. So it is a way of, it's filtering. And I think that just comes from a place of fear. And wanting to protect. And so again, if people have turned to astrology from a vulnerable space of wanting to understand, it can also be a tool for control. right? Because it is giving that deeper sense of meaning. And so that kind of, following or sort of, I'm doing what's astrologically right for myself is giving this kind of sense of control or sense of safety. But it's just that's illusory, right? As much as you're you're coming out of a place of conviction and this strong belief. Any astrologer ever will tell you what the stars are intertwined with your prayers, or the medieval saying was the stars incline, they do not compel. So there is a lot of wiggle room there. And so I think, again, acknowledging that and still that doesn't mean don't work with it. It just means work with it, but be aware that, the rules are guidelines.
Yeah. It's interesting you put it that way. I think because evangelicism, like the evangelical impulse is so baked into American culture and in the UK, it was the Church of England.
Yeah.
So, and there's a level of orthodoxy and dogma there. Especially when you're thinking of a spiritual practice that attracts people that sometimes came out of those traditions, whether, you're a queer kid that grew up in church and you're like, well, I can't relate to the church. But you still have the residue of I always say whatever I do, I'm a church kid at heart, right? So you have the residue of those systems that birth you. We're all swimming in that water. And I think naturally all of the dogma, the prejudice, the bigotry that lives in all of us that we can't help, that we're supposed to be trying to deconstruct, has followed us to astrology, and we haven't, realized it. I mean, I have my own thing. My thing is Leo men and Aquarius men. Before my son was born, I was like, please God, just not an Aquarius. Came a Pisces, but which I don't know if is much better. But you know what I mean? I was just like, and I don't even really believe in this stuff like that. But it's there was the thing, and then one of my kids is a Gemini.
Yeah.
And one of my friends called me. She was just like, I'm just going to tell you now, I'm a Gemini, and I can't stand my mother. Your daughter is never going to like you. She's going to love her dad. And I'm like, why would you call me? Do you know what I mean? And it's so it's just, and even in our popular imagination, people were like, well, Kanye and Trump are Geminis. And so we associate bad traits or bad people with certain signs. And I think that's just because that's the impulse that we have, not just in the West, but in the world. We kind of just can be very dogmatic and closed-minded.
Yeah, maybe, but you don't see Indians doing that as much, really. I mean, they don't, and they're not going to talk about just the sun sign because they acknowledge that it's so much more complex. Yeah, and so I think that's just become a habit
and the absence of community. Because I say my Indian friends, I'm going to reference Shrina again, how much these readings are even done with groups. She said that there's a man in her village and it was just her and her siblings and her cousins, you're all waiting to do this thing together. It's not like I'm going to some hole in the wall in West Hollywood and I'm going to pay someone $200 and it's me and this woman with her beads, which is a completely different thing, right? She was like, oh yeah, we were all there and we all heard each other's readings. I was like, that's weird. Why wouldn't you do it privately? She was like, no, we're all supposed to hear it. So we're all guided by it. So I think there's something to the way it's individually consumed, again, reentrenches that Western notion of, and our own biases and bigotry that just exist in this space.
You said it really beautifully, and it's self and other, and so that's the WASP ethic, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, and so putting that individualism and sort of I am this and you are that, and that is problematic in whatever way. Yes, discriminating based on sun sign just feels like another example of that.
Just before you go, you've been so great. I really appreciate you coming here today. I grew up in the church I've mentioned, which is very anti-astrology, even though we know the church does have an interesting relationship with astrology historically. And I was always like, well, it can't be that bad. The wise men used it to find Jesus. So there's something to it. So I know you're not a practitioner, so you don't read the stars, but you do understand them. I'm really curious to hear from your perspective. Where does astrology go next, especially in a pop culture context? Because it feels like among Gen Z and millennials especially, there's this deep search for meaning. It's kind of like the Billie Eilish question, what was I made for? With that longing and yearning, where do you think astrology goes next?
I think that there's a lot of traction for astrology going forward. I think that the people are going to continue to be drawn to it. And again, it's something that people have been drawn to for thousands of years. I noticed the soul boom behind you on the shelf and the spiritual revolution. I think that astrology will be part of that. I think that as people who have sort of been in secular environments for most of their lifetime start to turn inward, start to deepen their spirituality, that they'll turn to astrology possibly, or other forms of spirituality that are associated with the New Age, crystals, or other wellness practices. Tarot, yeah, of course, as well. And I think it'll continue to gain momentum. And I think really the big Zodiac is going to fuel that, for better or for worse. And
so you think that people are actually going to come into astrology via the apps rather than searching for the apps itself?
Maybe, yeah. And so I think, through that sort of use, right, of kind of everyone else has it, everyone's using it, then it'll become more popular. But then again, because it aligns with those deeper questions and search for meaning, that's why it'll kind of continue in this feedback loop. I don't know what that's going to mean for like the culture more broadly. Of course, in the academy, we're worried about this sort of anti-science administration and that sort of thing. And that's why things like astrology, which is supposedly not a science, right?
They spook people, like in this age of misinformation. Like, are we comfortable with like people being guided by the planets when they should maybe read a newspaper?
Yes. And so that's there too. And so again, that makes sort of the work of the public intellectual, such as ourselves, right? You said you're not an academic, but you're definitely an intellectual. So
I'll take it.
But that makes this sort of guidance of asking people to be discerning, to think about the information that they're consuming, to ask questions when they don't know, right? I mean, that's something else.
No one likes to say they don't know.
Yeah, but at the same time, that's important to look things up, to find reliable sources. All of that's still very important. And I think is also part of a search for meaning, right? You said yourself, like you'll go to one thing and then maybe go down another rabbit hole and that sort of thing.
Go back to Jesus.
Yeah. Jesus does have some good things to say.
Some great bars in the Bible. There are some great bars in the Bible. Yeah, I will say that.
Yeah.
Margaret, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Christiana.
I appreciate you.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
And where can the audience find you?
My Instagram is Margaret Gaida.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you.